I think Pat's absolutely right that there is this tendency to forget that there is a struggle now going on between those, the majority, who have voted 3 times in the last few years, who want federal, democratic and peaceful settlement in Iraq, as against those that want to restore the Ba'athist fascist-type regime that ruled there for 35 years, or to reinstate some form of Taliban rule, or a sort of extreme theocratic rule. So it seems to me that we absolutely have to be on the side of Democrats, and I would chiefly want to recommend that people look at the new Iraqi trade union movement, which has gone from 0, because it was brutally repressed under Saddam Hussein. It's gone from 0 to several 100,000, along with the rest of civil society organisations. And it beggars belief that the labour movement here hasn't made it absolutely central to everything it does to support the Iraqi labour movement. It seems to me that solidarity with people who are just like us, who want to retrieve the economic and political sovereignty of Iraq, absolutely, but are supporting the current UN sanctioned process, should be the #1 thing that all progressives should be doing. It's listening to Iraqis, and on the troops out aspect, which is quite a big issue here. Let's have no nonsense. When we met these 22 union leaders, we met them in Erbil in the north, troops out wasn't mentioned. And whenever I've talked to trade unionists from Iraq who come here, it's not at the top of their agenda. Ultimately, of course, they want foreign troops to go, but they are very clear in their own minds that withdrawing the troops quickly would be a catastrophe unless the Iraqis have their own security forces up and running.
Okay, and continuing with questions from the blog, just, bearing in mind public scepticism, with everything that's going on in Iraq, the question is, well, what would happen if there was a situation somewhere else? What would we do? And the question that's come through is, has the collapse of public trust in military intelligence after the prelude to Iraq meant that a mission to topple a ruthless dictator is no longer possible?
Well, I would certainly hope that wasn't the case. Look, let's be clear. It is perfectly natural for people watching on the news every night stories of atrocities against Iraqi civilians, most of them, of course, Muslims, stories of our own troops being killed, stories of American troops being killed. It is perfectly natural in those circumstances for people to question the presence of British troops and to wonder, where is all this going? I mean, I think that's completely understandable. But I think it would be a comfort to brutal dictators around the world, and it would also be a source of despair to progressive people around the world if we were to conclude, as a result of these terrible terrorist outrages and murders of civilians that are taking place in Iraq, that in the future, whatever a dictator did to their own people, the outside world could never intervene. I think that would be a counsel of despair. I think it is the wrong response to what's happening in Iraq, and the right response is to support democratic forces there who are trying to rebuild a country, and to support their efforts to secure a better future, rather than to turn inwards in the future.
Thanks, Pat. Nick?
Yeah, well, I wanted to talk about something that Gary's brought up, and Pat as well in his way, of why is it that the people who seem least able to see in Iraq or anywhere to ally with people who share their values are people, rich people in Europe mainly, but North America too, who call themselves liberal or call themselves left-wing. Before I came here, you mentioned Darfur in your opening remarks. I used my newspaper cuttings library to go through opinion pieces on Darfur. And there were plenty of people arguing on the comment pages for we shouldn't intervene in Darfur, it'll only make things worse. It's a line of argument. It's a line of argument normally associated with the realist school in America or Little England school in Britain, saying you don't do anything unless it's absolutely in your national interest. But here in 2007, those were articles which overwhelmingly appeared, not all of them, but overwhelmingly, in liberal papers by liberal writers. Alongside them were far darker pieces, were pieces which you probably recognise, pieces denying genocide in Darfur, not saying when does crime against humanity become a genocide, all the arguments we've had at the Hague Tribunal and what have you in the UN Genocide Convention, but just denying it completely, and implying that anyone who said there was the agent somehow, wittingly or unwittingly, of neocons, of Zionism, of some Jewish conspiracy. Very familiar arguments, but again, these weren't people from the far right. These were people from the far left. Now, it's not just the press. The other day, I love this quote. Tony Blair was giving probably his last interview to the Today programme, and he was talking, as Pat and Gary had been talking, and in his precise quote, he said the British foreign policy should be based on the spread of democracy, freedom and justice. And the interviewer, a chap called John Humphreys, blurted out, our idea of democracy. And the Prime Minister said, well, I didn't know there was another idea of democracy. And Humphreys interrupted again. He said, if I may say so, that's very naive. And the Prime Minister said, well, the one basic fact about democracy, surely, is you can get rid of your government if you don't like it. And Humphreys comes back again, but the Iranians elected their government. And the Prime Minister says, hold on a second, John, this is Iran. 60% of the candidates were banned. No free press, not free elections, it's all rigged, religious police terrifying people. Now, I'm not saying let's have a go at the BBC, I'm just saying how typical it is. I mean, I actually, I support the BBC, they don't have to threaten to send me to prison to pay my licence fee, I'll pay it quite happily, partly because in its coverage of Britain, its treatment of the staff, it is admirably anti-racist. And yet, to the BBC, the idea that free elections, a free press, the emancipation of women is fine for white-skinned people in London, but not for brown-skinned people in Tehran, is perfectly normal in our time. It's perfectly normal, even though this is a deeply reactionary idea, a kind of inverse racism, that it's culturally imperialist to ask for people in other countries and other cultures to have the same rights as you. And I've been going around promoting a book I got out about this, and I really have to battle away at this idea at the moment, particularly with left-wing audiences, because I think one of the problems Gary and Pat have got is that there's a consensus at the moment. It seems a left-wing consensus. It gives the appearance of being left-wing, the appearance of being liberal, while actually being deeply reactionary. And one of the problems when you're in a consensus is it doesn't seem ideological. It seems perfectly natural, as natural as the weather, and only outsiders notice what's going wrong. And I always throw this quote at people that Martin Amis gave, and he was a sort of outsider because he'd been living abroad, and he comes back to Britain a few months ago. He'd been living abroad for a couple of years in South America, and the readers of the Independent were asked to put questions to him. One said to him, what's most shocked you about Britain since you've come back? And Amis said, well, two things really. First was the sight of fat white leftists waddling along under banners saying we're all Hezbollah. Well, said Amis, enjoy being Hezbollah while you can, because its leader Hassan Nasrallah famously said, we don't want anything from the West, we want to destroy you. And then he said he went on Question Time. You might just say, well, those demonstrators things like that are just trots who are going over from the far left to the far right. Then he goes on Question Time, which most people watching this will have watched. And a woman in the audience, this picks up Pat's point, a woman in the audience stands up and comes up with the following brilliant argument. Because the Americans armed Islamic fundamentalists in Afghanistan in the 80s, the right reaction to the bombing of the World Trade Center would have been for the US Air Force to bomb itself. And Amis said the audience applauded. And he said it's quite a thing, really. Here are people, here are all of us, confronted with a global movement that is sexist, racist, homophobic and genocidal, and people are cheering it on. As potential victims are cheering it on. They're at the backside of people who want them dead. Actually, he uses a rather stronger word than backside, but as we're in Parliament, I think it would be unparliamentary language.